What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Wealth Workshop. My name is Tom Statham. I have the privilege of hosting this with my co-host, Jacob. Jacob, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Yeah, it's great. Great topics. There's a lot going on in the world.
Yes, there are. So last week's edition of the newsletter turned out to be very well received.
Yeah, we had like one of the biggest open rates I think we've almost ever have. And
Yeah.
we've been having, it's been kind of declining a little bit, but last week, like we bumped up a lot.
There's always like the summer lull. I think like this time of the year is really. I mean, people are just on vacation, right? And the articles that I'm reading right now, I read about an Oklahoma influencer yesterday who took over Nantucket. Today, I was reading about golf cart culture. So I think it is fair to say that America's on vacation. Although the newsletter last week, so we were talking about Jimmy Buffett's estate. Obviously, we talked about his estate on the podcast last week, but yeah, it was very well received. Why do you think it was so well received?
I think it's really relatable. Just like I think people have a lot of like we survey all these people and they all have almost everybody has like estate concerns or legacy concerns. Like they don't want they don't want to have burden on their kids or whoever their heirs are. And I think like just seeing it framed that way, um, I think it was just an interesting topic. I called it a must read. Like
Yeah.
following
Ooh.
up with people, I was like, this is literally one of your must read pieces. And even like last week's video, like it's a must watch video because I think just like what like there are just things in there that high net worth families almost need to know as they're like estate planning or like the risk to avoid or how things are set up and structured and what the actual estate looks like and feels like. Just
Yes.
really practical information.
Totally. So to catch everyone up, so we talked last week on the Wealth Workshop. So if you go back one video, we talked about Jimmy Buffett's estate. So first of all, I think let's just like get this out of the way. The fact that this is all public is incredibly, to me, just like very sad, and
Hmm.
mainly sad for Jane, Jimmy Buffett's wife of 47 years. So to catch everyone up, so Jimmy Buffett died with. It's hard to know his net worth. The more I was digging into this, the more questions, the more answers I found, but the more questions I have. So Jimmy Buffett has a marital trust that is for the benefit of his wife Jane, and their three children. And this trust has an independent trustee. This gentleman's name is Rick Monzenter, I think is how you pronounce it. And Jimmy Buffett was married to Jane for 47 years. And I believe Rick became a financial advisor and accountant to Jimmy in 1990, something like that. So, like, Jane's his wife. Rick's like a 30-year plus business associate of his. And so Jimmy left both of them in charge of his assets, and they are like royally butting heads right now to the point where all of this is public. So it's sad that this is happening, but we have a really interesting window into this feud.
Yeah, and just to clarify, this would be an irrevocable trust set up
Yes.
so they could get out of some estate taxes.
Yeah. There's also like estate strategy, but the gist of it is like Jimmy has a mourning widow, and there's some things, and that's what we talked about in the newsletter, of course, is like how they could um well, they would have never have known that this is what ended up happening, but there were, things you could probably avoid. But today I want to talk about the asset allocation within the trust because I think this is fascinating.
Yeah. So what is the asset allocation?
Okay, so uh again, because this is public, like we've got like a pretty detailed look into how Jimmy Buffett like built his empire. So when he died, so there's a company, Margaritaville Holdings LLC. Like when you think about the business side of Jimmy Buffett, like that is the holding that he put the restaurants. And I don't know if like his licensing, he like licenses his like uh name, what is it, name, image, and likeness. So
Oh, yeah.
he
Yeah.
owns, at the time of his death, it was reported he owned 28% of that company, Margarita Holdings LLC. And then now in recent court filings, it's a 20% holding. So when he died, Um, that holding I think was worth a lot more. And fast forward 2 years. So Jimmy Buffett died about 2 years ago. Fast forward, that the value of that holding is like halved, I think.
Hmm. So
So
it's 85 million now, right? That's what's
it's
in the
85
estate.
million now, and I think it was significantly higher 2 years ago. So the gist of what's happening right now is the independent trustee, again, this guy's name is Rick, told Jane at some point, and this is all in court filings, that the trust would earn net $2 million. So right now, that holding is worth 85 million. The hard assets, so those are like real estate holdings, cars. He's got, it's supposedly like a $15 million private jet. Is worth 56 million, and then the rest I think is like a liquidity, basically like a liquidity bucket. So um, Jimmy Buffett, so he's got this like really interesting asset that owns restaurants and licenses his name, image, and likeness that generates income that is put into this trust. And there's also assets that are worth something, obviously, but they don't produce income. And what's ended up happening is, I think, reading through the lines, there's just not enough cash flow coming out of this
Yes.
thing.
So there's $275 million of assets in this estate. And what's shocking is that this estate only produces $2 million of income annually. And I think that's before fees. And I think it's came out that Rick charges $1.7 million a year to this estate. So, after it all,
I think that 2 million is net. I think that's after his
net.
fees. Yeah.
Well, even still, $2 million is like, that's like 1% return annually, or 1% income annually, which is just, for a wealthy family that has $275 million, $2 million isn't a lot of money to be earning.
Yeah. And so that like income that the trust is producing, what's deceiving about that is there's a lot of just like maintenance and upkeep that the trust pays for that is not distributable income to Jane.
Beneficiaries, yeah.
Yeah, the beneficiaries. When I was writing this piece this week, the newsletter edition, when we were, when I was writing, going more into a deep dive, like the news say that there's a $275 million estate, but then when you add up the holdings that that all those news articles were reporting, it's like there's like $125 million missing. And I know there's like so many holes in the story. And when I was thinking, I'm like, what is going on here? Like, why are the headlines this, but the value of these assets that they're telling, everyone, is a completely different number. And I think it is because like it is so difficult to value private assets, right? Like I think the Margaritaville franchise is just worth significantly less than it was 2 years ago. So the rub here, of course, is like, Jane's like, well, why can't I have more money for me to spend? And Rick's like, well, all of these assets are inside a trust that you don't totally control yourself. And I think one of the root problems here is there's like Margaritaville, like that family used like the huge amounts of income, and it was also reported that like Margaritaville, that like that holdings, I don't know the timeline of this, paid out between like 14 to 18 million dollars of distributions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like they're definitely distributing income from Margaritaville, but all of that income is kept inside the trust to pay for like a $15 million private jet.
So they're spending more so from cash flow than like actual investments, right? So like, which is like a different place than like, oh, I have $2 million in a brokerage account and I want to go out and buy a $300,000 house. Like, wire the money on, this date. That's our closing date. Where it's just a little bit trickier of like, well, we're gonna get $14 million from Margaritaville, but we also have to put a new engine on the jet. we need to do some upkeep on our boat. We have some cars that need, whatever maintenance. We've got, XYZ other things. And then there's just a very small liquidity sleeve of just like available cash or like investments or assets that could be converted easily into cash.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. It is. This is like such a strange. The deeper you get into this, you're more like, how is this possible? How could this actually happen? When you think about like the fact that now that Jimmy Buffett's dead, like I think he was pretty active when he was still doing concerts later in life. So like he was still the marketing engine behind Margaritaville. So like fast forward 2 years, I have to imagine that like his like the business would suffer with him being gone, even like Margaritaville still is selling, like everyone still knows about Margaritaville, but it probably commercially is worth less. So like when I was thinking about this for just like the average person, right? Like hardly anyone, well, there's only one Jimmy Buffett. I'll just say that. And that equals, a very, very impressive net worth and business empire that he created that I think not a lot of artists have been able to replicate. And, but like when you look at the asset allocation of this, like there's a private asset that has clearly been volatile and is heavily reliant on somebody who is no longer living. The
Hmm.
family owns a minority control or does not have control over that asset, and they have like over $50 million of, like a third of their assets are assets that consume a lot of cash. And I think like at some point, like when you have like a lot of homes and boats and like things, like they just have a lot of toys, you get to a point where there's only so much you can do, right? And certainly if you're flying around on a plane, you need to have like, you want to have the best pilot you can possibly have, right? And those pilots cost a lot of money. So like the costs almost exponentially go up because you need to rely on other people's service and expertise to afford said lifestyle. And so they've just gotten I think Rick and Jane have just found themselves in a place where the lifestyle is extremely expensive. She's like, get me out of here. Rick's like, I don't like, this is what Jimmy wanted. Like he didn't want you to have access to your husband's money. And she wants to spend her money differently. And he's like, well, I need to control this private plane for the sake of not only you but your kids. And there's just this huge rub.
Do you think that's actually what, his intention? Or was it more so about I don't want to pay a bunch of taxes when I die? So like I think it's probably both, right? Where he's like, I
It's
want my
both.
wife to have money. Like I don't want for my wife to not have access to the money that we've built together over 47 years. But I also don't want half of this to go to the government. And actually, it can't really go to the government because it's all in illiquid hard assets or
Yeah.
private businesses.
I mean, at some point the estate's going to be taxed, right? Like you can't outrun estate taxes forever. So like at some point, like you've got to pay the piper. Like it's pretty much like you can set things up for like 100 years. Like you can have like dynasty trusts, but at some point, like somebody in the family line will be paying estate taxes. So they definitely avoided estate taxes, but they definitely like kicked the can down the road. I think so they were definitely they were trying to achieve multiple things with this trust, but ultimately I think what ended up happening is it's a combination of like liquidity. It's like they're not being liquid enough, right? Um, it's a combination of owning assets that are expensive to own, right? Like I've heard it said like multiple. If you own like three houses, you have like three headaches, right? So like headache number one, headache number two, headache number three, and so I think it's just this weird combination of illiquidity, like falling income, like high fixed costs that have caused this like extreme tension at a level of wealth that is hard to wrap your head around.
So does this only happen to like ultra wealthy families? Or like at what point does this like start to like affect ordinary people, right? Because like not all of us have the luxury of owning a $30 million jet or a few a few $1 million cars. But I mean, regardless, I mean, I own a car and I know that that asset isn't the best, like isn't the best asset on my balance sheet, right? It just sits there and consumes my cash.
Yeah. Well, I think that, the reason we're talking about this is because of like how striking it is. Like this is at a level of wealth, like I said, that's hard to wrap your head around. Yet the actual like personal financial problems that are at stake here are just like they're just very normal, right? Where the family like at this point in time has found itself at a point where the composition of the balance sheet, so the composition of the asset base, it's hard to pencil out. And like this can happen to anyone, right? Like I was just cruising the YouTube, and there's some like fear mongering car market experts saying that like the car dealerships in August they can't sell cars at all. It's like, well, the reason they can't sell those cars is because people don't want to put air quotes an asset, a car, on their balance sheet and use debt to do so, because the cars are themselves so expensive and it costs a fortune to finance them. So in like a strange way, what's happening in this, like, sadly, this very public estate issue. I mean, it's not really an estate. It's just like a trust. It's an infighting of trust that went into courts. It's just it's very relatable in some ways. It's very not relatable, but very relatable at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, like Jane, his wife, is like, I need more money. Like, why can't I get more money from this $275 million bucket? And I think you said this, that like most of the people that you talk to have a Jane Buffett problem of like, I want more income. Like, I want this money to be more accessible to me, or like some form or variation of that at like basically any asset level. Like, if you have $1 million or $10 million or $1,000, like, how do I get access to this money in a efficient way that like keeps it going, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, money needs to be useful, right? Like there has to be utility, right? And so like this problem, it's very much like a momentary problem, right? So like this independent trustee Rick is like, he wants to stay on as a trustee because he feels like a strong allegiance to Jimmy Buffett, the guy he was basically was his, perhaps like his employer or one of his top clients for 33 years, right? Like I certainly understand that, right? Like you feel just a really strong sense, but he also gets paid $1.7 million a year to serve one trust, right? Albeit it's very complicated. Like there's like owning Margaritaville Ellis, like the holding company, like that in and of itself would be like, I mean, that's people are like, people are arguing, is that fee worth it or not? It's like, well, for what it looks like and how to, what it takes to manage a $15 million private plane, a collection of cars worth $5 million. Like there's a lot of people that are on that payroll. Um, so you have, like that, incense, like conflict of interest. And then, Jane's like, I want somebody else to manage these assets differently so she can, get out of this, perceived problem that she's having. So this is just like a momentary thing in time, but I think when thinking through like, what should your balance sheet look like, right? Um, I was thinking, writing this piece and like digging into this, and like, gosh, it's impossible to know what the future holds, right? Like it's impossible to know like when you're going to get like an extreme cash crunch, but um the warning signals were like high fixed costs. Like when you have a lot of fixed costs, when you own a lot of things that require a lot of cost to own them,
Which
clearly
would be
what we're seeing
plain.
here, yeah, like planes, houses, boats, like I know what his custom boat that he built. I mean, it's super cool. I saw this years ago. I'm like, Jimmy Buffett, you are a cool dude. But it's here they are, and it's really sad to see this struggle. play out publicly.
Right. Yeah, I don't think that Jimmy would have ever had that intention of basically showing the world his balance sheet and his estate, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So an interesting article I was reading a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to talk to you about this for a while, but it was the ladies. She's a professor and at UCLA at their School of Business, and she wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal about like where financial advisors get it wrong, right?
Mhm.
On their advice to people. And basically the point of the article was that, people's preferences for how they want their balance sheet. So the balance sheet simply being the list of assets and the list of debt, like which equals your net worth, that financial advisors in total don't get that right. Like the outliers are extreme and there's more. She was basically saying like financial advisors advice is too general, and
Mhm.
that people largely don't value liquidity, for example, which is simply how fast you can get your cash. People More people like want private investments than what is being offered by financial advisors. And I read this article and it sort of irked me the wrong way because I know what we do for our clients and like the lengths we go to. But the thing I was thinking about and what I thought about this article when I was reading about Jimmy Buffett is like everything that this article is saying about like what people want, like they don't care about liquidity, like they want private assets. Um, like financial advisors aren't like they try and put people in too basic of a buckets. And like we're kind of like seeing in real time at a state worth hundreds of millions of dollars, like where there's limits to that.
Yeah. I mean, there's some like there's definitely efficiency gains to like having a very standardized process for, a lot of clients, right? The customization of like each person has like some people have three houses, especially in our area here, right in Fargo. People have a place in Arizona or a place here in Fargo and place, at the lake. Like I know a lot of our clients have a setup similar to that. Um, like that's a very common thing. And what their balance sheet and what their asset base needs to look like because of that is definitely different. And like liquidity is a huge part of some of those things. But for some of others, like some other people, like it's not quite so much a big thing. I think like generally making too big of assumptions on like what advisors actually do based on surveying some people is just not quite right.
It's hard to know like how your assets work together, right? So like 2 years ago, Jimmy Buffett died. On his deathbed, he's like, Margaritaville is going to make my wife $10 million a year. It's guaranteed income. Like that is going to pay for the plane. Like we don't need to sell the plane. We're going to keep the plane. Like everything that he had worked hard will just continue in perpetuity. But what's difficult about personal finance and everything that you just said is like how it all works together when things go south. And
Hmm.
because like 2 years ago, the family was sitting down, or maybe 2.5 years ago, they probably had their last meeting with their estate planner, with their advisors, and they were like, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is where the money's going. This is where the income's at. Like Jimmy Buffett probably had his like, his like, everything's going to be fine. Like Jane, conversations at the kitchen table or, sitting on their patio at night, like they probably had conversations like, we're going to be fine. Like, I know I'm dying, but like, we're good. Like, we've got all this set up. Like, Rick's going to take care of you, these assets, Margaritaville. And it's just difficult when you don't know how to predict your future and to, um, for people to really understand how these assets work in hard times. The only like solution I have here is like Margaritaville's the value went down, which would mean like sales go down, and that directly eats into profitability like instantly. So distributions went down. So the value went down, the income went down, but the plane still consumes, whatever tens of thousands of dollars a month. The boats, everything, like it would have been to really question the do we need $5 million worth of cars?
It's the balance sheet structure. Like what balance sheet structure? I mean, at this point, it's like Jimmy Buffett, I think it was more than capable of like that structure worked for him because he was the face of Margaritaville. And so there wasn't really a huge concern about like, well, what happens like with the revenue because like Jimmy Buffett can still go and do concerts and drum up
Mhm.
interest and keep people reminded of him and his brand and his legacy in a way that Jane or especially Rick can't do. And so like there's this like disconnect of like, well, we don't have that lever to pull and the balance sheet isn't constructed for this new stage the right way, right? Where it's like much more like we need more liquidity and more just like reliable cash flow producing assets than we have now. The rub is like, well, Jane also was used to the same lifestyle that she was living with when Jimmy was alive, right? Like I'm sure they got on the plane together. I'm sure they used the boat together.
Absolutely.
I'm sure they drove, rode together in the same car, right? So we're like these assets aren't just like easily sold either. Not even from like, is there a market to sell these things, but just like what does Jane feel about selling a boat that they've made memories on for
Yeah.
years, right? Not an easy thing to do, and like especially Margaritaville, right? Like you don't want to. You said at the beginning. I mean, this is basically the flagship asset of this estate. Like that's not something you want to sell because so much income comes off of that. If it's true that an $85 million Margaritaville distributes $14 million, I mean that's a pretty good source of returns or of income,
Yeah,
rather.
I think the obvious case here is like you would keep, it would be to like this to me is like just a cost issue, right? Like the like the income like that asset isn't producing the income maybe that it was 2 years ago. It would be, don't kill the golden goose. Don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. It would be to question the um, you know, the yeah, those assets that they just own outright that are just that consume a lot of cash, and that is my guess where the rub is, right? And so like when we go back to well, it's like what does this mean for me? Uh, what does this mean for you? Uh, and this is like a really hard exercise, but it's just to stress test the heck out of what you own, right? And just understanding that as wealth goes up, it's like the income that it's kind of one of the things where it's like just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I don't want to like poo poo or judge their financial decisions at all because clearly they've done something that is like he's one of the probably the most successful recording artists of all time. So I don't want to like judge them, but like clearly, where they got is a place where I don't think it's would ever be worth a family going down.
So what questions would you actually ask? Like, let's just say that you became the independent trustee. Like Jane was successful, she replaced Rick and she called up Tom. Like I know you can't necessarily just say like, oh, here's exactly what we do, but like you became the independent trustee. Like, what questions would you actually like ask to like kind of remedy this type of situation?
I wouldn't I don't want to answer that question like to remedy like once everything hit the fan. Like I think the better question, and this is what we are getting at in the newsletter last week, was like get ahead of this stuff. It's like it's talking. I just like the when I was writing last week's piece, like we're talking about asset allocation and like the really just what happens when your balance sheet when things on your balance sheet don't work how you think they're going to work. The question last week was like, did they have a really, really honest conversation about Rick? Like, did they actually really, really like, did Jimmy really have a, hard conversation with Jane about like, do you trust this guy? Like, and then also like, do you actually want all this stuff? Like, um, and then somehow that would have need because he gave control to two different people for two different reasons. That's like the really hard part about this. But the common thing is like, well, can't they just take all these things out? It's like no, because that would screw up the estate plan and the estate tax, strategy that they're trying to do here. So what I would have said differently was like, how honest are the conversations with everyone, and what happens when a business like Margaritaville. Like again, I don't know their sales or anything, but like it appears that things maybe aren't going as well as they thought, or the company, the majority owners want to expand, right? So they, rather than distribute cash, they reinvest the cash to open another 10 Margaritavilles, right? Or like going to New Orleans and or like going to Houston, like, opening new stores. So it would be just to really go through and just have these honest conversations and just talk about potential outcomes and just say, okay, what if this outcome happens? What if this outcomes happen? What does that mean for us as a family?
So in this case, I mean, they would have essentially had to have those conversations in 1990, or is there an opportunity, but like after 1990 to
No, like the other thing I was thinking about too is like they put all of their assets in here. So actually they put Margaritaville, like how I think this actually happened is like Margaritaville, like that asset was owned in the trust, and that asset became really big. And so like all of the assets that are not Margaritaville Holdings LLC or whatever it's called, those are just assets that Margaritaville's profits bought. So like it owned, like Margaritaville just made this, was so successful, and they still spent money personally, right? But there's a lot of income that was retained by the trust. And so yeah, like I don't think Jane has a lot of assets outside of this trust other than just personal real estate that she can use to fund the life that she wants to live.
hmm. Yeah,
So
that's actually a good point, because it's hard to imagine like how a $275 million estate has 12 million and just like other assets in it. But that would make sense then, because like Jimmy Buffett would have used this, or the other executives that managed Margaritaville would use the plane to fly between places, or the cars, company cars, or something like that, right? That makes a lot of
yeah,
sense. Yeah.
yeah. Well, the company, I mean, the $5 million car, I mean, there's probably Ferraris and Lamborghinis and like, classic cars worth a lot. Like those, those would have been owned by the trust, but who paid, like what
Yeah.
income was used to buy those assets were the distributions from Margaritaville. So there's like, I think what's complicated about this is there's different like entities and there's different people. So like this is, so while there's like things that you and I probably will never dream of, like complexities here, like given how big this estate became. Um, but then again, there's also like, well, there's just high fixed costs will kill you. Like that is just a personal finance 101. Like if you have a lot of bills, that is harder to like, it is harder to be financially free. So like could they have done anything different? It's like it's really hard to know. But like these trusts, it like all of their eggs were in one basket. And I think, Jane is like feeling, and meaning all the assets were owned by one, trust vehicle.
Yeah.
And there was not a lot of diversification there, and how they could have done that different, I don't totally know. Um, but fascinating question. So I think the thing is, for like more normal people like, you and me, it isn't so much like the entity structure, it's more so um high fixed costs, like what assets produce income, what assets drain income, right? So he had an asset that produced a lot of income, and he owned assets that ate a lot of income. And like that worked for a long time. And now we're at a point in time in 2025 summer where it's like, this isn't working. So for us, it's like being careful. This to me, I'm thinking about Dave Ramsey in some of this too, where it's like, just if you spend less than you make, you're fine.
Yeah, I mean I mean, yeah, honestly, if you spend less than you make, you're fine. And even just setting it up so like there is success that way too. Like you might be fine in your living life, but like what happens? What happens when you're not around anymore to pull the same levers you've always been pulling?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah,
And this can come down to like, I just think communication, just having the hard conversations. And even I'm thinking too to myself right now, I'm like, have I had the hard conversation with Camila? Like if I actually had, like, if this goes south, like what does this mean? And that to me is like the ultimate point of all of this, like the takeaway is like, have honest conversations with your spouse and your advisors too. Like the more complex it is, like the more important these conversations become, because like this is awful for Jane and her kids, and it just sucks, right? But that, like, having the hard conversations, like, well, what does a hard conversation even look like? It is saying, sitting down with your spouse and just being like, hey, how are you doing? And not the how are you doing, like, how are you actually doing? And financially speaking, what's stressing you out? What don't you like? What do you wish was different? And then, bringing your team of advisors in and saying, like, hey, this is like a problem we want to solve. Like, if we look into the future, what does this mean for us?
Yeah, that feels like a good place to wrap it up, actually. Just like from an action perspective. Yeah.
There we go. All right. Well, okay. All right. Per Jacob, we're going to wrap up this episode. If you guys like this, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're going to be putting these out every single week. And we really value your feedback. So we'll drop an email address in the description here if you have some questions you want us to answer. But check out our newsletter as well. And thanks for tuning in to the Wealth Workshop podcast. We'll see you guys next week.